Tonight, we go live to the White House for late-breaking developments in the search for a new Supreme Court justice. At this hour,
we have a list of 25 people that I actually had during my election. I had to 20, and as you know, I added 5. So it will be somebody from that list. So we have now boiled it down to about 25 people.
That after today's stunning resignation from Justice Anthony Kennedy that has Democrats reeling about what this means for the future of the country. Good evening, everybody. I'm Martha MacCallum, and this is a big story. Justice Kennedy's decision gives conservatives led by President Trump a solid grip on the highest court in the land, potentially for a generation. Conservatives are elated at that. Liberals, not so much.
But if he gets replaced by a hardline social conservative, it is the Democratic leadership will have hell to pay.
And Roe v. Wade is doomed. It is gone because Donald Trump won the election.
What is important are the issues that will change if a president's nominee is going to go through that changes the course of our history today.
So the president said today that the process of picking this nominee will begin immediately. Joining me now, Assistant to the President and Senior Advisor for Strategic Communications, Mercedes Schlatt. Mercedes, good to see you tonight. Thank you for being here. Obviously, a big day. Did you have a heads up that this was coming? Because a lot of people were surprised.
Well, Supreme Court Justice Kennedy came over to the White House, spoke with the president about his retirement. Obviously, the president was incredibly thankful for Justice Kennedy's distinguished service and for what his fine work that he's done on the Supreme Court. We know Justice Kennedy has been one to fight for and vote for, support religious liberties and freedom of speech, and also as well has been a champion of state rights and judicial restraint. So he's going to be a big loss to the Supreme Court.
You heard some of those voices aghast at the possibility that Roe v. Wade could be overturned, given what will likely be the new composition of this court. Is that something that the president would like to see?
Well, at the end of the day, the president's going to pick the most qualified candidate in the mold of Justice Gorsuch. As we know, Justice Gorsuch has been one who's been respected on both sides of the aisle. He received, obviously, the highest rating from the American Bar Association, someone incredibly qualified. And that's what the president's going to look for, a very qualified candidate who's going to uphold the Constitution. As we know, when it comes to the judicial system, it's one that has to interpret the law, not make the law. And what we've seen in so many cases in many of these activist judges across the country, it's that of activism in the courts. And so for the president, this idea of ensuring that we have a qualified individual who's going to uphold the Constitution, ensure that there's judicial restraint, and keep the court where it is, I think that's the priority for this president.
All right, so you're not going to tell me whether or not that's a litmus test for this president in terms of judges and in terms of what he's looking for, overturning Roe v. Wade.
As you know, the president is going to most likely pick from that list of 25. Yeah. And again, I think we got to look at it from the sense that it's the mold of Justice Gorsuch, someone who is incredibly respected in the legal field and someone who obviously received the highest rating from the American Bar Association. And that's what he's looking for, someone incredibly qualified who's going to uphold the Constitution. Yeah. And that's a priority that he has.
All right, two more questions for you. Timeline. What should we expect? How quickly is this going to happen?
Well, I think the president is obviously looking to interview these particular candidates. You know, he wants to move quickly on this. As we know, and we saw this even, you know, along the lines of Gorsuch, it took about a 3-month process by the time he had his hearing and he was obviously nominated, had his hearing and was confirmed. President wants to move on this quickly, and so he's expecting Congress to move in that direction. We're looking to see, obviously, when you looked at, for example, Elena Kagan in 2010, where the Democrats, it was 3 months before the midterm elections, and they were able to get her confirmed because they knew that there was no reason for there to be a holdup and to simply get her confirmed. So the goal here is not to play politics, but to ensure that this vacancy is filled on the Supreme Court. All
right. What do you think this is going to fire up the base? Put your political hat on for a moment here. Is this something that you think helps Republicans as they head into the November elections?
Look, I think at the end of the day, for the president, he wants to ensure that we have a Supreme Court justice put in place. We don't want to see this vacancy. I think it's very important that the Democrats cooperate with Republicans on ensuring that we have a Supreme Court justice in place.
That's going to be an easy process, no doubt. That's going to go swimmingly.
Look, they should follow along the lines of 2010 and Elena Kagan's confirmation, where in fact they were able to confirm Elena Kagan 3 months before the midterm elections. We don't need a whole, this is a process
that was pre-Merrick Garland. I don't think they're in the same mood these days. Mercedes.
Well, the Democrats' obstructionists, if they continue down that path, obviously that's going to continue to hurt them along the way, especially when you're seeing that President Trump's agenda is winning. And in fact, when he puts his name behind it, and it's where we know that his policies are winning and why Republicans can be so successful.
Mercedes Schlapp, always good to see you. Thank you very much.
Great to see you, too. Thank you.
So interesting to remember that Kennedy was not President Reagan's first choice. In fact, he was his third choice. First was Robert Bork, which we all remember. That sparked a brutal Senate battle. He was defeated. His second pick was Douglas Ginsburg, who withdrew after admitting that he had smoked marijuana, which obviously is no longer a benchmark for pretty much anything in the country. And then came Kennedy, who was viewed as the consensus nominee.
Justice Kennedy's career has been marked by his devotion to a simple, straightforward, and enduring principle that we are a government of laws, not of men. Our Constitution, our form of government, is built on a bedrock value. Self-government, yes, but self-government with a purpose, which is individual liberty.
Judge Andrew Napolitano is our Fox News senior judicial analyst. Can you believe there was a time when you could get bumped from this whole process for smoking pot? And you look at what's going on now in the country?
Right. Oh, how the times have
Simpler
changed.
times, right? I know that you obviously have thought a lot about this process. And the last time around, you spoke to the president about the process. And he shed some light on what his thinking is on how he approaches this question. And I would think it could go pretty quickly, given the fact that he did it not too long ago, and he's pretty familiar with these players.
I think he's going to narrow the list of 25 down to 3. I think he will interview those 3 personally. And I think he will choose which one of the 3 he wants and go with that person.
Who do you think those 3 are?
I don't know, honestly, who they are, but I know their characteristics. They are all pro-life. They all believe in something called judicial humility, which is the recognition that the judiciary is the 3rd branch of government, that the presidency and the Congress are more important, that they set public policy, that it's not the job of judges to set public policy, but just to interpret the law and to apply the Constitution to the laws that the Congress has written. A sort of deference, if you will, to the primacy of the other 2 branches. I know the president's going to be interested in that because of the many topics he and I discussed when he eventually made the great decision to select then Judge Neil Gorsuch. This was the one that interested him the most. What is this judicial humility? How do we find it? And I can tell you now that the teams of people that are working for him are already reviewing the judicial decisions of those on 25 on the list, looking for judicial humility.
I was told, look for a female Gorsuch, a female Judge Gorsuch, and someone who is on the younger side, who will be around, hopefully, God willing, for a long time.
That is my fellow Notre Damer, Judge Amy Conant Bryant, who was just appointed to the United States Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit, which sits in Chicago. I knew you were going to lure me into talking about names. She was added to the list just 2 months ago, without any knowledge of what Justice Kennedy was going to do. The president on his own said, put her on the list. She's already a sitting appellate court judge, and they put her on this list.
Yeah, she is, I think, 49 years old. She might be 47 years old.
Yes.
And she, people who have been watching this, she had an interesting exchange with Al Franken, as I remember. So I wonder if, they go back and watch that and say, oh, she's already somebody who's got a little bit of controversy with some of the senators. She's not there anymore, of course.
She had an interesting exchange with Senator Dianne Feinstein, who basically said, you're too Catholic. Too Catholic to be on the court. That was rejected. She was actually admonished even by other Democrats for saying that, and Judge Barrett was confirmed. The issue is going to be abortion. As I indicated to you, everybody on that list is pro-life. Anthony Kennedy is Roman Catholic, but not pro-life. So that number, the 5-4, the 4-5 to 5-4 on the pro-life issue will change.
Fascinating. Judge, great to have you here all day and tonight as well. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, Martha.
Here now, Mark Thiessen, former chief speechwriter for President George W. Bush and Fox News contributor, and Mark Penn, who served as advisor to the Clintons, working as a pollster for 6 years. He is chairman of the Harris poll. Mark, let's get a Democrat's voice in here as we look at this. What do you make of it?
Well, I think the issues here are going to be abortion, marriage equality. Is the nominee someone who is going to put those rulings at risk? I think Judge Napolitano didn't mention stare decisis. Will they continue those rulings, or will we be in for social upheaval? If it looks like social upheaval, Democrats are going to, I think, pull out all the stops, and Republicans will pay a very heavy price with women at the ballot box.
Interesting. Mark, when you look back at the history of GOP presidents' picks, they have not been as good at picking people who are ideologically aligned with them as Democrats have. They have a pretty stellar record in the people that they have picked. But you look at Judge Souter, Judge Kennedy, going back, Earl Warren is also on that list of people who ended up being very different judges than the Republican presidents who picked them.
Yes, so Donald Trump needs to break with Republican precedent then, because the Democrats are batting 1,000 when it comes to putting judges on the court that toe the line, the liberal line, whereas Republicans have placed a lot of judges on the court that end up defecting to the liberal bloc. Justice Kennedy among them, who was regularly voted on some issues with the liberal bloc. So that's one. There's two reasons why this is an absolute nightmare for Democrats. It's a nightmare judicially, it's a nightmare politically. Judicially, the Gorsuch nomination basically preserved the status quo. They took an opportunity away from them from moving the court to the left. Gorsuch replaces Scalia. That's the status quo ante from before that nomination. But this moves the court further to the right, because Justice Kennedy was that swing vote in a lot of cases, and we're going to have now, if Trump does his job correctly and picks from that list, a justice who does not defect the way Kennedy did. Now, politically, it's a disaster because this is coming just as the Democrats are trying to take back the United States Senate. There are 5 Democrats running in states that Donald Trump won by double digits, and this is a nightmare for them because they have to now. This is the last thing they want to be talking about for the next 3 or 4 months, because they can't win no matter what they do. They have to present themselves as centrists in order to win their seats. If they vote for the Trump Supreme Court nominee, the left will crucify them. If they vote against the Trump nominee, the right will crucify him, the Trump movement. So there's no safe harbor for these people. This is an absolute political disaster.
Joe Manchin already came out today saying, well, we're going to look it over. Clearly this is not the thing that they wanted to happen between now and the November election. Just one other interesting note, and this really does put Justice Roberts in sort of the swing seat. He did not necessarily vote the way Republicans wanted him to on the health care vote, but other than that, he's been pretty consistent, but it kind of puts him potentially in the swing vote. Let's go to the pollster. Mark, what would you advise Democrats who want to keep those Senate seats about how they handle this conundrum?
Well, I think Democrats are going to be looking to get those moms back who already have a lot of questions about the Republicans and the administration. And so I think they're going to, if there isn't a nominee here who, like Gorsuch, really has to be confirmed because they're so clean in terms of their personal history, I think they're going to vote against. And I think that's what you're going to see happen here. I think the nightmare scenario for President Trump is that he puts out a nominee, the nominee gets borked, and there won't be time for a second nominee.
But how can the nominee get borked? I mean, how would that work politically?
Well, I think politically, if so much of a fuss is raised about an issue, it won't be marijuana anymore. I think the president would probably be well advised to pick a woman, and that will take a lot of issues, I think, off the table, and probably be good for him politically if he does that. But if the nominee gets into trouble, then there's not going to be time for a second, and then we will go to the election with this as the #1 issue, and that is good for Democrats, bad for Republicans.
Great point. That's going to be fascinating to watch. Thanks, you guys. Great to see you both tonight. Still ahead, Peter Strzok is still, at this hour, on the hot seat behind closed doors. He has been enduring hours and hours of questioning behind closed doors on Capitol Hill, where we are told that he did answer questions about what he meant when he said that he would stop President Trump's election. Fascinating stuff. House Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodlatte was inside the hearing. He joins me next. Plus, a young New York socialist is likely to be elected to Congress in November, and there is a lot of rejoicing over that in some corners. Ben Shapiro has his hot take after the break.
I get to Washington not just alone, but with an entire caucus of newly elected progressives that don't take corporate PAC money.
A candidate in New York, a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, has won her primary in a stunning upset.
You're talking about ICE should be abolished, you know, you want government jobs, you know, guaranteed government jobs. What do you say to people who say that this is just too much?
Well, I think what we've seen is that working class Americans want a clear champion, and there is nothing radical about moral clarity.
The DSA, as it is known, believes in the abolition of capitalism in favor of an economy run by the workers or the state. Of course, this is only a primary, but make no mistake, this win is being heralded as the start of a movement.
She has a message that the Democrats have not had.
She came out of nowhere, and it is a message that people on Washington are already waking up and taking the note.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a sign. She is not, I think she's not an anomaly. She is not a glitch. She is a feature of a fight to come within the Democratic Party.
So disdain for corporations and capitalism appears to be gaining traction in some ways in America. According to recent polling, just 42% of young people support the idea of capitalism, and socialism gets 33% among young voters. Earlier tonight, I spoke with Ben Shapiro, editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire. What do you make of this? Is it an anomaly, or do you think this is a movement?
No, I do think this is a movement. I think the next wave of Democrats are going to be much closer Bernie Sanders brand Democrats than even Nancy Pelosi brand Democrats. And what you see here is the sort of howling at the moon branch of the Democratic Party, in which they throw out whatever radical proposal they want and suggest that this is truly authentic, that moral clarity lies in making proposals that are completely untenable, that will never be paid for. You know, this person was on MSNBC this morning, and she was asked specifically about how she'd pay for all of this, and she proceeded to blab for a solid 2 minutes without giving an answer to that question, because she doesn't have a way of paying for any of this. But, of course, the Democratic base has decided that it is much more important to have somebody who is virtue signaling about why everybody should have a government job and why housing should be government provided than to actually have candidates who have policies that can never be implemented.
Yeah, she was talking about President Trump also earlier on MSNBC and calling him a authoritarian hyper-capitalist is the way that she termed him. And, you know, when you look back, let's look at this shot from President Trump, and the difference in President Obama is how they approach capitalism.
If you got a business, you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen.
Nobody's cut regulations like we have. Nobody's created tax cuts like we have.
I mean, there can't be sharper voices that are more different on this issue than we've had in the last two presidents, Ben.
No question. But and I think that's what the Democrats are picking on, is the fact that the Democrats have always been moving in this direction, or at least they have been significantly in the past 8 years. There's a reason Bernie Sanders came very close to knocking off Hillary Clinton in primaries, and it is pathetic to say that a near octogenarian is the wave of the future, but I think that Bernie Sanders has a lot more acolytes among the under 30 crowd than Hillary Clinton ever did, and this is pretty good proof of that.
I thought this was, you know, particularly ironic. Lin-Manuel Miranda, who I think is a genius. I thought Hamilton was wonderful, but I think it's interesting that someone who essentially wrote a musical that is a love letter to the founding fathers and to the Federalist Papers and to Alexander Hamilton is applauding. He's saying, congratulations to you. You know, for this woman who is essentially, you know, not essentially, she's put herself out there as a socialist. What do you make of that?
Yeah. And, you know, she's as radical as can be. But, again, it is very easy to virtue signal about policies that have no impact when they're never implemented. Yeah. Bernie Sanders never did anything in the Senate until he ran for president. And I highly doubt that any of the policies that are espoused by Ocasio-Sanchez are really going to result in anything real here, because it's easy to go home and say that big government's going to solve all your problems. When it comes time to hash out the actual legislation, it's going to be pretty difficult to get that stuff passed. So the Democrats who are so all-fired eager about the new wave of the Democratic future, they may find that this is not in the mainstream. This is a New York district. It has been a Democratic district for 20-odd years. I mean, longer than that. But the person she replaced had been a 10-term congressperson. So it's not as though winning a Democratic primary means you're the wave of the future all across America. It means you want a Democratic Party in New York, for goodness sake.
Yeah, well, Joe Crowley didn't show up for the debate. He might be rethinking that at this point. I have about a minute left with you, Ben, and I do want to ask your reaction to the huge news today, the resignation of Justice Kennedy, and what you think.
I mean, it's just astonishing, obviously. I was really not expecting that Justice Kennedy would step down, given that he's the swing vote. And it gives President Trump an enormous opportunity to remake the court in a conservative constitutionalist image for a full generation, which is, again, President Trump has been both lucky and good. And he has an opportunity now that he's been lucky to be good again here.
Yeah, well, I know you, well, maybe you didn't suggest yourself, but you did suggest.
Hey, I'll take it. If I'm nominated, I'll take it. Come on.
Why not, right? You have nothing else to do.
The confirmation hearings would be lit.
Exactly, they would be. I think it was Ann Coulter who first suggested back when you were 21, when you were a law student at Harvard, that you would actually make an excellent Supreme Court justice. And as you pointed out today, you'd have a pretty good long run at it, most likely.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe they're for a solid 60 years. So, Mr. President, if you're looking for somebody who's going to have several decades on the court, longer than anybody else you're looking at, I'll throw my hat in the ring. And if not, I'll just cry myself to sleep.
You know what?
Right.
My Twitter feed is just flowing right now with people who are just jumping on board. Thank you so much, Ben. It's always great to see you. Thanks so much.
Good to see you.
So President Trump on the move again tonight. He has just landed in North Dakota as we see Air Force One on the tarmac this evening. He's getting ready for another rally. That's going to happen in about 35 minutes from now. And tonight they look to be on time, so we'll be following that closely. And coming up tonight, new satellite pictures raising serious questions about the commitments that President Trump got from North Korea. General Jack Keane breaks it down next. Plus, how did now former FBI agent Peter Strzok explain his text messages under what we understand was very tense questioning in there?
News headlines 24/7 at Channel 115.
And there is the president just stepping off Air Force One moments ago. A live look at Fargo, North Dakota, where he is for a rally for Republican Congressman Kevin Cramer, who is running against Heidi Heitkamp. This is clearly one of the races to watch. He would like to see Congressman Cramer replace Heidi Heitkamp. President Trump won North Dakota by 36-point margin. So he has obviously a very strong base there. And, you know, it's obvious an interesting dilemma now for Heidi Heitkamp and others we talked about, like Joe Manchin and Joe Donnelly, who live in red states and are Democrats running for re-election in the Senate. So tonight the president is going to speak at a venue that we are told holds about 6,000 people. And we would expect, there's John Kelly, the chief of staff, getting off the plane as well. We would expect that we will hear something probably about the Supreme Court pick that came up today. Also, several good Supreme Court decisions that went President Trump's way that he can also talk about this evening as he tries to rally this crowd. So also some changes at the White House this evening. We are told that Bill Shine, former co-president of Fox News, will be taking over a position in communications. The chief of communications spot has been